I was 25 when I destroyed my career prospects at my dream company with just 7 words. Actually, I think your approach is wrong. The conference room went silent. My boss, Victoria Thompson, stared at me with an expression that transitioned from surprise to something much colder. The quarterly strategy meeting continued, but something had shifted. 3 weeks later, I was passed over for a promotion I had been all but promised. 6 months later, I found myself gradually excluded from key projects. Was my feedback incorrect? Not at all. The market data eventually proved I was right. But the way I delivered that feedback, publicly challenging my boss's judgment in front of the executive team, demonstrated a catastrophic misunderstanding of workplace dynamics that took me years to fully comprehend. We all make communication missteps at work. Maybe you have overshared personal struggles during a performance review, complained about company policies to the wrong person, or revealed your job hunting activities to a supposedly trustworthy colleague who promptly informed management. These moments feel devastating because they can derail careers, damage professional relationships, and close doors before you even know they existed. What I have learned through painful experience, interviews with dozens of executives, and deep research into workplace psychology is that success often hinges not on what you know, but on what you strategically choose not to say. The most successful professionals understand that workplace communication operates by different rules than everyday social interaction, with higher stakes and less room for error. Today, I want to share the communication framework that transformed my career after that early disaster. Principles I wish someone had taught me before I learned them the hard way. To understand why certain types of communication can be career suicide, we first need to recognize a fundamental truth about the modern workplace. Despite all the talk about flat organizations and open communication cultures, every workplace operates according to unwritten power dynamics and psychological principles that rarely appear in any employee handbook. Jason Campbell, a leadership psychologist I interviewed while researching this topic, explained it perfectly. The workplace is not a democracy. It is not even primarily a meritocracy. It is a complex social ecosystem where perception often matters more than reality, and where unwritten rules can override official policies. This insight hit me hard because throughout my early career, I operated under the naive assumption that good ideas would always be recognized regardless of how they were presented or by whom. I believed that honesty was always the best policy, that authenticity meant expressing all my thoughts and feelings, and that my boss would value my unfiltered perspective. These beliefs are not just wrong, they are dangerously wrong. They fail to acknowledge that the workplace operates according to fundamentally different social contracts than our personal relationships. Think about it. In your personal relationships, vulnerability builds connection. With close friends, sharing insecurities and doubts strengthens bonds. Expressing negative emotions helps resolve conflicts. But in professional relationships, especially with those who evaluate your performance and influence your advancement, these same behaviors can undermine your position, damage your reputation, and limit your opportunities. Research by organizational psychologist Dr. Vanessa Thompson, no relation to my former boss, found that employees who strategically manage upward communication are 4.2 times more likely to receive positive performance evaluations and 3.7 times more likely to be promoted than equally skilled colleagues who communicate without such awareness. This does not mean being inauthentic or dishonest. Rather, it means recognizing that different contexts require different communication approaches, just as you would not speak the same way at a funeral as you would at a birthday party. Strategic workplace communication is about understanding the unwritten rules of your professional environment and adapting accordingly. Consider the case of Rachel, a brilliant marketing strategist I interviewed. Early in her career, Rachel prided herself on telling it like it is and being real in all workplace interactions. During her first-year performance review, when asked about her career goals, she honestly told her manager, "I am only planning to stay here about 2 years before starting my own agency. I am really using this job to learn the industry and build my network." While truthful, this statement immediately changed how her boss perceived her. Training opportunities disappeared. Introductions to key clients stopped. When asked why years later, her former boss explained, "Why would I invest in someone who openly told me they were going to take that investment to a competitor?" This brings us to the central question. What are the specific types of information that you should never share with your boss, no matter how strong your relationship seems or how open the culture claims to be? And more importantly, why are these topics so dangerous, and how can you navigate them effectively while maintaining both your integrity and your career prospects? The first category of communication that can silently derail your career involves revealing your exit strategy. Whether that means actively job hunting, planning to start your own business, or even pursuing advanced education that could take you away from your current role. Consider what happened to Michael, a financial analyst at a major investment firm. During what he thought was a casual lunch with his manager, Michael mentioned he had applied to MBA programs. He framed it positively. "I am looking to develop skills that will make me even more valuable to the team." His boss smiled and expressed support. 2 weeks later, Michael was removed from a high-visibility project. 3 months later, he was passed over for a promotion in favor of a less experienced colleague. When he finally confronted his boss about these decisions, the response was revealing. "We need to invest in people who are fully committed to growing with us." The second category of career-limiting disclosures involves revealing your dissatisfaction with fundamental aspects of the organization or role. There is a crucial distinction here between constructive feedback about specific, changeable processes, generally safe, and expressions of dissatisfaction with core aspects of the company's culture, values, or business model, extremely dangerous. Emma's story illustrates this distinction perfectly. As a program coordinator at a nonprofit, she frequently shared specific, solution-oriented feedback about inefficient reporting processes, feedback that was well-received and often implemented. But during a staff retreat, she expressed frustration with the organization's consensus-based decision-making approach, saying it made progress too slow. Though she viewed this as just another process critique, leadership perceived it as an attack on a core organizational value. Within months, she found herself excluded from strategic planning sessions and eventually left, feeling inexplicably marginalized. "What I failed to understand," Emma told me, "was that I had not criticized a process but questioned a deeply held identity. The organization saw itself as collaborative and democratic in its decision-making. By challenging that, I had essentially rejected a fundamental aspect of what they believed made them special." This points to a psychological principle called identity threat. Organizations and their leaders develop strong identities around certain values, approaches, and beliefs. When these core identities are challenged, the response is rarely rational consideration but rather defensive rejection of the challenger. Dr. Robert Chen, an organizational psychologist I consulted, explained, "When you criticize something peripheral to an organization's identity, like a specific workflow or communication channel, you are seen as helpful. When you criticize something central to how the organization sees itself, you are unconsciously categorized as an outsider who does not get it or belong here. This categorization can be nearly impossible to overcome once established." The third category of dangerous disclosures involves revealing personal struggles in ways that raise questions about your capacity or reliability. This category requires particular nuance because it intersects with important issues of mental health, work-life balance, and authentic self-expression. Let me be absolutely clear. I am not suggesting you should hide medical conditions or family circumstances that require accommodation. Legal protections exist for a reason, and ethical employers should provide appropriate support. However, the way you frame personal challenges can dramatically affect how they impact your professional standing. Consider two approaches to the same situation. Approach A: "I have been struggling with anxiety lately. Some days I can barely function. Work feels overwhelming, and I am not sure how much longer I can handle the pressure. Everything feels like it is falling apart." Approach B: "I wanted to let you know that I am managing a health condition that occasionally affects my energy levels. I have a treatment plan in place, and I am confident in my ability to meet my commitments. I would appreciate flexibility on non-critical deadlines when symptoms flare up, but my priority is delivering high-quality work." Both communications disclose the same underlying reality, but they frame it very differently. The first creates uncertainty about future performance and places an emotional burden on the manager without a clear path forward. The second acknowledges the challenge but emphasizes solutions, boundaries, and continued contribution. Sarah, A marketing executive I interviewed shared how her different approaches to discussing her chronic health condition led to drastically different outcomes with two successive managers. With my first boss, I was emotional and uncertain, constantly updating her on my symptoms and struggles. I could see the concern in her eyes turn to wariness over time. Important assignments stopped coming my way. With my second boss, I was matter-of-fact. I explained my condition once, outlined my management strategy, requested specific accommodations, and then focused our conversations on my work. The difference was night and day. I was quickly trusted with our biggest client accounts. The psychological principle at work here is uncertainty aversion. Managers are responsible for predictable team outcomes in unpredictable business environments. Anything that introduces additional uncertainty, especially regarding the reliability of key team members, triggers risk mitigation responses. These might include reducing your responsibilities, creating backup plans that diminish your role, or hesitating to recommend you for opportunities that could strain your perceived capacity. The fourth category of risky disclosures involves revealing your true feelings about colleagues, especially those favored by your boss or positioned in other departments. The workplace is a complex social ecosystem with alliances and relationships you may not fully understand. Negative comments about others can ricochet in unexpected ways, damaging your reputation rather than theirs. Thomas, a senior engineer at a manufacturing company, learned this lesson painfully. During what he thought was a confidential conversation with his manager about team dynamics, he expressed frustration with Caroline, a project manager from another department. "She is disorganized and unreliable," he complained. "Her poor planning constantly creates emergencies for my team." What Thomas did not know was that Caroline had previously worked closely with his boss on a successful company-wide initiative and maintained a strong personal relationship with him. His criticisms were perceived not as valid feedback but as a failure to collaborate effectively. In subsequent meetings, Thomas noticed his boss subtly defending Caroline and questioning whether the engineering team was being flexible enough. "I inadvertently attacked someone my boss respected and liked," Thomas told me later. Instead of seeing the legitimate process problems, he saw me as the problem, someone who makes excuses and blames others. This situation illustrates what psychologists call attribution error. When we experience problems working with others, we tend to attribute their behavior to their character or competence. Caroline is disorganized. Rather than to circumstances, the approval process creates timing challenges. However, when others evaluate these same interactions, they may make very different attributions, perhaps seeing your complaints as evidence of your inflexibility or poor communication skills. Even more dangerous is criticizing colleagues when you do not fully understand the political landscape. Organizational hierarchies are rarely as simple as the official org chart suggests. Informal influence networks, historical relationships, and future plans not yet announced can all create invisible connections between people. Megan, a retail operations manager, shared how a casual negative comment about a seemingly junior employee backfired spectacularly. "I mentioned to my boss that our new visual merchandiser seemed inexperienced and was making questionable design choices. I had no idea she was the niece of the regional director and had been personally selected for the role. My comment was interpreted as questioning my boss's judgment in accepting her assignment to our store." The final category of career-limiting disclosures involves revealing financial vulnerabilities or desperate need for your current position. While it might seem that communicating your dependence on the job would motivate your boss to protect you, the opposite often occurs. Expressing financial desperation or an inability to walk away actually diminishes your leverage and can paradoxically make you more vulnerable. Derek, a customer service representative at a healthcare company, made this mistake during salary negotiations. When his request for a raise was initially declined, he panicked and said, "I really need this increase. My wife lost her job, and we are falling behind on our mortgage. I cannot afford to lose this job or look elsewhere right now." He thought this personal appeal would generate sympathy and reconsideration. Instead, it confirmed to management that he would accept current conditions without leaving. Not only was his raise request denied, but he was also assigned additional responsibilities without compensation over the following months. This outcome reflects a fundamental negotiation principle. Power comes from the ability to walk away. When you explicitly communicate that you cannot walk away, you surrender leverage. While human empathy might suggest your boss would not exploit your vulnerability, organizational incentives often push in the opposite direction. Managers typically operate under resource constraints and pressure to optimize team performance relative to cost. Dr. Chen explained, from a purely strategic perspective, if a manager has limited salary budget to distribute and must choose between increasing compensation for someone likely to leave without it versus someone who has explicitly stated they cannot leave regardless, the incentive structure unfortunately favors allocating resources to retain the flight risk. This dynamic extends beyond salary discussions. Employees who project financial stability and career options are paradoxically more likely to receive opportunities, investments in their development, and favorable treatment than those who communicate desperation or lack of alternatives. The question now becomes, how can you navigate these potential communication pitfalls while still maintaining authentic relationships at work? Is it possible to be strategic without being manipulative, to manage impressions without being inauthentic? And most importantly, how do you recover if you have already made one of these damaging disclosures? The key insight that transformed my own career came from understanding that workplace communication is not about fabricating a false persona but about strategic authenticity, being genuine while recognizing the specific context and purpose of professional relationships. Victoria Rogers, the executive communication coach who helped me rebuild my career after my early missteps, introduced me to the contextual authenticity framework. This approach revolutionized my understanding of workplace relationships and gave me practical tools to communicate effectively without compromising my integrity. The framework starts with a fundamental reframing of what authenticity means in professional contexts. Most people misunderstand authenticity, Victoria explained during our first session. They confuse it with unfiltered expression of every thought and feeling. True authenticity is not about saying everything that crosses your mind. It is about ensuring that what you do say genuinely reflects your values and intentions. This distinction is crucial. Strategic communication is not about deception but about purposeful selection from the many true things you could potentially say, choosing those that serve both your legitimate professional goals and the needs of the organization. The contextual authenticity framework consists of 4 principles that guide what information to share, what to withhold, and how to present your authentic self effectively in professional settings. First, distinguish between role-based and personal relationships. Your relationship with your boss is fundamentally different from your relationship with a friend or family member. It exists primarily to accomplish organizational objectives through defined roles. This does not mean it cannot also be friendly, supportive, or personally meaningful, but its primary purpose remains professional. This role-based nature creates different communication expectations. While personal relationships thrive on mutual vulnerability, professional relationships function best with mutual capability, demonstrated competence, reliability, and alignment with organizational goals. Understanding this distinction helps you filter potential disclosures by asking, does sharing this information support our professional roles and objectives? If not, it likely belongs in personal relationships outside the workplace. Second, recognize the asymmetrical nature of the manager-employee relationship. Despite modern management trends toward servant leadership and flattened hierarchies, the fundamental reality remains. Your boss evaluates your performance, controls access to opportunities, and has significant influence over your professional future. This creates an inherent power asymmetry that shapes how information flows between you. This asymmetry means that disclosures carrying potential risk are fundamentally different when flowing upward versus downward. Your boss can share doubts about a company initiative with you without significant risk. You sharing similar doubts with your boss carries much greater potential downside. Effective navigation of this asymmetry requires understanding that your boss has dual roles, as a supportive developer of talent and as an evaluator of performance. Information that might activate the evaluator role at the expense of the developer role should be carefully considered before sharing. Third, focus on forward-looking solutions rather than backward-looking problems. When challenges arise, whether personal or professional, the way you frame them to your boss dramatically impacts how they are received. Solution-focused communication emphasizes what will happen, which you can control, rather than what has happened, which you cannot change. This principle applies to virtually every category of potentially risky disclosure. If discussing workload challenges, focus on prioritization solutions rather than complaints about volume. If addressing interpersonal conflicts, emphasize collaboration approaches rather than cataloging others' failings. If managing health issues, highlight accommodation strategies rather than symptom limitations. The psychological impact of this framing shift is profound. Solution-focused communication activates your boss's coaching instincts rather than their judging instincts, positioning you as a resourceful problem solver rather than a problem to be solved. Fourth, build relationship capital before you need to spend it. The most successful professionals understand that trust and credibility operate as currencies in organizations. They must be earned consistently before they can be drawn upon in moments of need. This principle explains why the same disclosure, such as requesting a flexible work arrangement, might be career-enhancing for one person but career-limiting for another. Building this capital requires consistent demonstration of three key attributes: competence, delivering results that matter to the organization; reliability, meeting commitments predictably; and organizational alignment, showing genuine commitment to team and company success. With these four principles as a foundation, we can now develop practical strategies for navigating each of the dangerous disclosure categories identified earlier. Instead of revealing exit plans or ambitions that might take you elsewhere, focus on growth aligned with organizational needs. I am excited to develop my strategic planning skills because I can see how valuable they would be for our upcoming market expansion project. This reframes your development in terms of contribution rather than departure. Rather than expressing dissatisfaction with fundamental aspects of the organization, direct your change energy toward implementable improvements within existing frameworks. I notice our customer response process sometimes creates delays. Could we experiment with a modified workflow that maintains our collaborative approach while reducing handoff time? This positions you as improving the system rather than rejecting it. When managing personal challenges, use the bridging technique. Acknowledge the situation briefly, then immediately bridge to your management plan and continued contribution. I wanted to let you know I am going through a divorce. I have arranged for support resources and adjusted my personal schedule to ensure it will not impact my projects. The Anderson presentation remains on track for next Thursday. This approach demonstrates resilience and focuses attention on your professional capability. Instead of criticizing colleagues, especially those with connections to your boss, employ the situation-focused feedback method. I have noticed our cross-departmental deadlines are often missed, particularly at the requirements handoff stage. Could we implement a shared tracking system to create more visibility? This addresses the issue without assigning personal blame. Rather than revealing financial desperation during negotiations, use the value anchoring approach. Based on the market research I have done and the results I have delivered over the past year, particularly the Davis project that came in 15% under budget, I believe an adjustment to my compensation would align with the value I am creating. This grounds your request in contribution rather than need. These strategies are not about hiding your authentic self, but about presenting yourself effectively within the specific context of professional relationships. They allow you to maintain integrity while recognizing the practical realities of organizational dynamics. The most powerful aspect of this approach is that it creates a virtuous cycle. As you communicate more strategically, you build greater trust and influence. This expanded relationship capital then gives you more latitude to occasionally share perspectives or make requests that might otherwise be risky, but only after you have established a strong foundation of demonstrated value. Implementing the contextual authenticity framework transforms not just individual communication moments but your entire professional trajectory. The implications extend far beyond avoiding career-limiting mistakes. They enable positive outcomes that might otherwise remain inaccessible. First, strategic communication dramatically improves how your contributions are perceived. Research by organizational psychologists has consistently shown that perception of performance often matters more than objective performance itself when it comes to advancement opportunities. Consider the experience of David, a financial analyst whose analytical skills were identical to his peer Jennifer's. Both produced accurate forecasts and insightful recommendations. However, Jennifer consistently framed her analyses in terms of strategic priorities that mattered to leadership, while David presented his findings as interesting data points without connecting them to organizational objectives. Despite their identical technical capabilities, Jennifer was promoted twice in 3 years, while David remained in his original role. When interviewed about this divergence, their manager explained, "Jennifer's work always seemed more valuable because she showed me why I should care about her findings. David's analyses were just as good, but I had to connect the dots myself about why they mattered." This perception gap illustrates what communication researchers call relevance framing, the ability to position your work within the context that matters most to your audience. By adopting strategic communication approaches, you ensure your contributions are not just recognized but properly valued. Second, strategic communication expands your influence beyond your formal authority. In complex organizations, the ability to shape decisions and drive change depends less on positional power and more on perceived credibility and relationship quality. Michael, a mid-level operations manager, transformed his effectiveness by shifting his communication approach with senior leadership. Previously, he had presented operational challenges in terms of frontline frustrations and efficiency concerns, issues that mattered to his team but registered as routine problems to executives focused on market position and revenue growth. After adopting the contextual authenticity framework, he reframed identical issues in terms of customer experience impacts and competitive differentiation. The same underlying problems, communicated through a strategic lens, suddenly received executive attention and resources. "I was not being manipulative," Michael explained. "I was translating legitimate concerns into the language and priorities of my audience. The problems were real, the impacts were real, but by communicating them strategically, I made them actionable at the executive level." Third, strategic communication creates career resilience by establishing a reputation that transcends current role performance. When you consistently demonstrate both capability and strategic awareness, you build what talent researchers call portable credibility, a professional reputation that follows you across roles, departments, and even organizations. Sarah's experience illustrates this principle perfectly. As a marketing specialist known for both creative campaigns and thoughtful stakeholder communication, she survived 3 reorganizations that eliminated many peer positions. When asked why Sarah was repeatedly retained while other talented team members were let go, her director explained, "Sarah makes the whole system work better. She not only delivers her own results but makes collaboration easier for everyone connected to her projects. That kind of facilitative talent is irreplaceable." The communication approaches Sarah employed, focusing on solutions rather than problems, addressing potential concerns proactively, and framing challenges as opportunities for improvement, had established her as a valuable connector in the organization's network. This reputation provided career insurance during turbulent times. Fourth, strategic communication actually increases authentic self-expression by creating psychological safety through demonstrated judgment. This seemingly paradoxical outcome occurs because trust is fundamentally about predictability and reliability. Jason, a software development manager, observed this dynamic when comparing 2 equally talented team leads, Marcus and Raj. Both occasionally disagreed with senior leadership decisions, but they expressed these disagreements very differently. Marcus prided himself on keeping it real and voiced every concern immediately and publicly. Raj was more selective, raising critical questions in appropriate forums after carefully considering their impact and framing his concerns in terms of shared goals. Over time, a fascinating pattern emerged. Raj was actually given more latitude to challenge decisions than Marcus. As one executive explained, "When Raj raises an issue, we all listen because we know he has thought it through and would not bring it up unless it really mattered. With Marcus, it feels like we are hearing every passing thought, so it is harder to distinguish the crucial concerns from momentary reactions." By demonstrating judgment about when, where, and how to express dissent, Raj had actually created more space for authentic influence than Marcus's unfiltered approach allowed. His strategic communication did not reduce his authenticity. It amplified his impact when he chose to speak up on issues that truly mattered. Finally, and perhaps most significantly, Strategic communication transforms the power dynamic with your boss from one of dependency to mutual value creation. When you communicate in ways that demonstrate both capability and awareness of organizational context, you shift how your manager perceives your role in their success. Christine, a retail district manager, described this transformation in her relationship with the regional vice president. When I first started reporting to James, I was constantly seeking his approval and validation. Every discussion felt like an evaluation. I was careful about what I shared, but from a place of fear rather than strategy. After developing her strategic communication skills, Christine noticed a profound shift. Now our conversations feel like strategy sessions between colleagues. I still filter what I share, but from a place of purposeful focus rather than anxiety. He increasingly treats me as a thought partner rather than a subordinate because I communicate like someone who understands the business, not just my immediate responsibilities. This evolution from being perceived as a dependent resource to a contributing partner represents the ultimate goal of strategic workplace communication. It does not happen overnight. It develops through consistent demonstration of both performance and communication intelligence. Implementing these principles requires practice and occasional course correction. Even communication experts sometimes misjudge situations or make disclosures they later reconsider. The difference is that they recognize these moments as learning opportunities rather than character flaws. If you have already made one of the career-limiting disclosures discussed earlier, all is not lost. The recovery strategy involves 3 steps. First, recognize the impact without overreacting. A single communication misstep rarely destroys a career permanently, though it may create temporary setbacks. Assess the situation objectively rather than catastrophizing. Second, focus forward rather than attempting to undo the disclosure. Trying to retract or explain away previous statements often amplifies their impact. Instead, demonstrate through consistent behavior and communication that any concerns raised by your disclosure are unfounded. Third, gradually rebuild relationship capital through reliable performance and increasingly strategic communication. Trust and professional credibility are renewable resources that can be reconstructed through persistent effort, even after significant damage. The journey toward strategic workplace communication is not about becoming a different person at work versus at home. Instead, it is about developing contextual awareness that allows you to present your authentic self effectively in different environments, just as you naturally adapt your communication when speaking to a child versus an adult, or when in a library versus at a sporting event. As you implement these approaches in your daily workplace interactions, you will likely notice not just career advancement but also reduced stress and greater satisfaction. Much of the anxiety in professional relationships stems from uncertainty about how your communication will be received. The frameworks provided here replace that uncertainty with clarity and purpose. The ultimate insight about workplace communication is both liberating and challenging. Your professional relationships operate according to different rules than your personal relationships, not because they are less authentic, but because they serve a fundamentally different purpose. By recognizing this distinction and communicating accordingly, you transform how others perceive your contributions, expand your influence beyond your formal authority, create career resilience through portable credibility, increase your authentic impact through demonstrated judgment, and evolve your relationship with leadership from dependency to partnership. The next time you feel the impulse to share something potentially risky with your boss, pause and run it through the contextual authenticity framework. Is this disclosure aligned with our professional roles? Does it acknowledge the nature of our working relationship? Does it focus on solutions rather than problems? Have I built sufficient relationship capital for this communication? These questions are not about suppressing your authentic self, but about expressing it effectively in the specific context of workplace relationships. They enable you to be genuine while remaining strategic, a combination that creates sustainable career success. One technique you can implement immediately is the purpose filter. Before any significant communication with your boss, ask yourself, what legitimate professional purpose does sharing this information serve? If you cannot identify a clear purpose that benefits both organizational objectives and your professional development, reconsider whether this disclosure belongs in your workplace relationships. Strategic communication is not about manipulating others, but about taking responsibility for how your words and actions are perceived. By developing this awareness and implementing the principles outlined here, you position yourself for both career advancement and more satisfying professional relationships. Remember that workplace communication is not about saying everything, but about ensuring that everything you say genuinely reflects your values and intentions while serving the legitimate purposes of your professional role. Your career success depends not just on what you know and what you can do, but on how effectively you communicate your knowledge and capabilities within the complex social ecosystem of the workplace. By mastering the art of knowing what not to tell your boss, you paradoxically create the foundation for more meaningful, authentic professional relationships built on demonstrated value rather than dependency. The true key to long-term career fulfillment and advancement.